I like campgrounds in the off-season when it isn't crowded, and my girlfriend and we went to our favourite federal campground. The campground is only open a few months of the year. The average snowfall is 350 inches, so it's usually snowed in. It's crowded during the summer, but rarely anybody around midweek during off-season. There is usually a campground host parked in an RV around to help people with firewood and stuff. He's an old man that I know, and he wasn't there this time. The typical federal campground where you put $12 in an envelope and drop it in a strongbox. There are also two loops surrounded by campsites, with a particular site that is our favourite, as it's further off the perimeter and private. It was odd when we arrived though, because, well, we were literally the only people there. No host or other campers anywhere. We were stoked though about having the place to ourselves, really. We did the usual truck camping setup with tent, firewood, cooler, books and other items that we wouldn't carry backpacking. We walked around the campground and didn't see anybody the entire time, which was a little strange, but not too concerning. We built a fire, sat around enjoying the evening. Gorgeous fall weather with leaves falling and crunching when you walk. But those of you who camp know the sound of fire too, and the leaves rustling in the wind like that. It's my favourite season in the woods, and this was an above average night. Eventually though, we retired to our tent, and I really don't remember what time it was. It was our big truck camping tent though, not a small backpacking tent by any means, so we could move around some. Laying in the tent, reading, and she falls asleep before me. I should say here too that there's just no way that a vehicle could pull into this place and not be heard, because it was like dead quiet, super peaceful. I was listening to the leaves blow and thinking about what a privilege it was to actually be here at this time. I was wide awake and not tired enough to sleep, so I got up a few times to check the fire embers. But sometime, probably after midnight I would guess, I'm laying in my sleeping bag reading and I hear something walking around. Now, there are deer, elk, moose, lions, and bears moving around in the fall, so I wasn't immediately alarmed. No grizzlies in Colorado since the 70s, at least that's what most people think anyway. Some scientists disagree and say that there might be a few remaining. Black bears don't really scare me unless they're acting aggressive. I'm pretty familiar with bull moose in the area that I've been seeing for years. But I stopped reading and I listened carefully. I could hear the leaves blowing, but also something walking on the leaves. It was getting closer to the tent when I realized that it was bipedal. Immediate fear kicked in, and this was different to anything that I'd felt before. This time, I froze. I couldn't take a breath. My heart was beating out of my chest like I wanted to hide. I'm trying not to move or make a sound as I hear it walking around the tent. Unmistakably walking on two legs, mind you, because the dry fallen leaves accentuate every step. I never considered waking my girlfriend for some reason, which I don't know why I didn't do that. Terrified in a calm rather than panicked way, I'm laying there trying not to move, unable to take a deep breath, considering what the heck was walking around the tent. We all know how different sized people sound walking on dry leaves. A 225-pound man sounds very different than a little girl, let's say. But this creature walking around the tent must have been huge. I could tell from the footsteps and, man, I was petrified. I didn't have a gun, but I did grab a good-sized knife before I left, and I held onto it knowing that, it was probably useless. Now, this is where things get absolutely terrifying, as if it wasn't enough already. I'm waiting there, waiting for whatever this is to leave, hoping I hear whatever it is walking away from the tent and campsite. But no, it starts getting closer. I hear it walking towards the tent, and I'm breathless with fear now, literally waiting for something to grab us. In fact, I was completely paralyzed with fear, as I remember I couldn't move. Getting out of the tent, too, was just never an option. The moon was relatively full that night, so when it approached, too, I saw a huge shadow of a creature standing up through the tent fabric. I could hear it breathing on the tent, and it was standing directly above, looking at me through the tent. It was without a doubt bipedal as well, stood over me for a few minutes. Then I hear it walk away from the campground, back into the utterly vast wilderness. Obviously, I couldn't sleep after that. Listened all night until sunrise. I didn't tell my girlfriend right away, but I started packing up our stuff to get out of there immediately. Looked around and didn't see any footprints, but the leaves were thick on the ground, so it wouldn't be easy to see. Packing up, though, I noticed still nobody else in the campground. I know it wasn't a deer, an elk, or a moose, or a lion, or a bear. It could have been a huge man, but where did he come from, and what happened to him? Nah, I know it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been. It didn't seem to want to harm us or anything. I know because I was vulnerable just laying there, and it could have easily killed us. I thought about it and wondered if this is connected to some other incident that I've described in another place. Was I fleeing from something like this before, but being stalked? What if it has the same sort of mimicking ability? Could this be what's taking people? There are other documented missing 411 cases in the area as we are in our near cluster. One case in particular comes to mind that I'm not sure is covered in a missing 411 book. The same general area where a few years ago an experienced hunter went missing in September from a group of several men from out of state. Apparently experienced and familiar with the area, the man goes missing, search and rescue look everywhere for a few days, and the man was found later, dead in place where people had already searched. No clear cause of death. I know one of the search and rescue people, and he said it was really, really weird since they searched where he was found relatively close to the camp. Did this man tick off whatever this was watching me? What the heck is even happening here? Finally, though, to help give some context to the setting, I'm sure some of you will say that it was a man, but this was a vast wilderness and one of the more remote areas of the lower 48. I encourage people to look at the map of Route Medicine Bow National Forest and the Zirkle Wilderness. This particular campground is completely isolated. There is approximately 3 to 4 mile drive down a dirt road to the main road to the campground, so you hear vehicles approaching. There's nothing too, but vast expansive wilderness in the direction from which it came and also where it went. I'm increasingly thinking that this incident is related to another experience that I've had. I've seen some strange things in the woods, but I wasn't at any point in fear for my life. But this time, I'm 54 and I've spent most of my life exploring the backcountry without anything too frightening happening, until about 3 years ago. And it's alright if you don't believe me or offer an opposing point of view. I'm not trying to convince anybody or anything. I just wanted to share my story. Lastly, too, this wilderness isn't like Georgia or Ohio, where you'll eventually run into civilization if you keep walking in any direction. You could literally walk for weeks and many miles without seeing anything but backcountry. When I was around 9 years old, my friend, an immediate neighbor, and we were playing basketball in my front yard when I noticed a small white sort of grey car parked across the street in a position such that its windshield was facing our house. In said car was a middle-aged man, clearly pointing a camera at us. I stared for a while and squinted because I was trying to see if he was actually photographing us, or maybe just reviewing photos on the camera while holding it oddly. But after watching for a while, it was obvious that he was pressing the clicker, photographing us. My friend and I immediately went inside, decided for some reason not to tell my mother, and we went up to my room. Anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour later, my mum asked my friend and I if we could deliver a box of cookies to my other neighbor. We agreed, and as for me at least, I had completely forgotten about the prior incident. I guess because I was 9 and having fun with my friend. We walked up the stairs, though, to the woman's house with the cookies, and we rang the doorbell, but she wasn't home. When we turned around, there was the man in his car again. He had parked along the curb right at the entrance of the stairway leading up to the woman's house so that we couldn't walk down the stairs and up the sidewalk without coming in direct contact with his car. And I still remember the absolute feeling of dread and panic that filled me in that moment. We immediately began banging on the woman's door and frantically ringing the doorbell, to no avail. That man rolled down his passenger side window and began talking to us. He said, "Clara? That's my friend. It's me, Harry." I looked to my friend and could tell that she didn't really recognize him, but the fact that he was claiming to be somebody that she knew, talking to us and not immediately pursuing us, made me calm down a little bit at least. He proceeded to say that he had lived in the house across the street from her and had a daughter her age that she used to play with when she was a baby. Interestingly enough, Clara said that there was in fact a family who lived there who had a young girl that she played with, so that checked out. She said that she couldn't recognize the man, though given the fact that she was 5 when they moved and 3 when they used to have contact, it's not likely that she could have recognized him, even if he was who he said he was. He proceeded to say that he was photographing us to show his daughter, who missed her, and said that he was going to record us. He took out his camera again and began recording us in a very interview-like fashion, saying, "Hi, what's your name? What do you like to do for fun?" I know for a fact that I told him where I lived in this interaction, though I can't remember if he asked me that directly or if I just volunteered it. I think the elation I felt over the fact that he didn't immediately kidnap us made me way too open with him. He videotaped us for roughly 30 minutes to an hour, and then he just drove away. But this story honestly gets more and more disturbing to me the older that I get. There is no way this man, this self-proclaimed old neighbor to my friend, was videoing us because his daughter was nostalgic for a friend that she had when she was 3. Why was he back in the neighborhood? Where was his family? There was no reason to wait outside of our houses for hours just to film us after already photographing us without our consent. It makes me sick to think about what was done with those photos. Who is this man who knows all the young girls of the neighborhood, past and present, and what did he do with those photos and videos? So I used to own a house near the mountains in the northern side of Colorado. This was a period of time when I had just gotten fired from my job because of COVID-related reasons and was home alone. I lived with my roommate at the time, but he went out to some club that night, leaving me alone with my dog. And to be honest, I hate to even think of this. This is the first time I've ever really told anyone besides my neighbors. So, it was around 8 p.m. on a Friday, and I was watching Friends on the TV. But while watching, I heard what sounded like boxes shuffling around in the basement. My dog immediately noticed this too and brought his head up. Our basement wasn't finished, and we had a window down there which wasn't in good shape, so I had just brushed it off thinking that the wind was making noise. After a while, though, the noise just never really stopped. I decided to grab my light and head down there with my dog. I grabbed my light from the kitchen and opened the door to the basement. I started walking down the stairs, calling my dog. The only odd thing was that my dog decided to not come down with me and was making that, high-pitched noises dogs sort of make when they're, unhappy or whatever. He refused to go down there in the basement and just stood at the top of the basement. To give you perspective on how my basement was laid out, there was a lot of my extra stuff from my childhood, like clothes and such, that were in the back right corner, so when you walk down them on the very right, that is where that stuff is. All of my roommate's stuff was right next to mine on the left, and there was a bench with all of the previous owner's stuff that they left there. So, while going down there, the sound was still very clear and was getting louder and louder the farther that I got in there. I saw the window open and making noises, and decided to go and close it. But as soon as I closed it, it felt like a hand grabbed my leg. But it wasn't a normal hand, it was like super hot. My legs were swooped back and I actually fell over, and all I can remember from this point was my dog barking extremely loud. I then woke up and found myself in the closet of my roommate's bedroom. I walked downstairs and looked at the time. It was 3 and my roommate wasn't back yet. I looked at the clock and grabbed my phone, dog, and ran outside the front door. I went over to the neighbors around maybe a mile away and I ran there bare feet. I didn't have a car at the time, so that was the only way to get there. But when I got to the neighbors, that I barely knew, mind you, I rang the doorbell extremely quickly, and around a minute later a man opened the door and asked why I was ringing his door this late at night, and I could tell that he was quite frustrated with me. I told him everything, and he said that the previous owners moved out because the husband actually ended everything in that basement. We talked for a while, and I let my dog run around in the back. I called my roommate to not go home and come over to the neighbors. Around an hour later, he showed up, and we all just sat there and talked about what had happened. At around 10 in the morning, I headed back to my house with my roommate to find the sofa flipped over, all the doors open, and the cabinets in the kitchen all open with dishes on the floor broken just everywhere. And after that, I decided to go live with my sister and sell the house around 2 months later. To this day, I'm still not sure what that was and haven't had any other experiences. But by the way, something that I didn't tell was that I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I've heard before that spirits thrive off of bad energy or whatever, and I don't know if that was the case, but let me know what you guys think, because I would sure love an explanation for this one. I've always wanted to share this story, and I decided that I should do it. I don't really have any way of proving my credibility or anything, but if you've ever visited or live in rural parts of South Asia, you can probably vouch for me in saying that it's a lot more plausible than one might assume. Also, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but I wanted to recount it precisely the way that I remember it. So I had one of those moments recently where a lot of things just came together in my brain to make sense of an event that my child mind couldn't properly comprehend at the time. My mum was born and raised in the UK, but she's of South Asian descent, and since I'm mixed, she tries really hard to make sure that I'm in touch with my culture. This meant too that as a child, we made a lot of frequent visits back home. It was like every summer that I can remember was spent there, and then it just suddenly stopped after this incident. So my mum's family back home live in an extremely rural part of the country. There's a lot of poverty surrounding our family home, so we rarely left our relatively nice part of the village. I was never allowed out to explore, but coming from the concrete jungle that is London, I was always really curious. And I'm going to explain what happened on this one particular day the way that I remember experiencing it, and then I'll explain what I failed to realize at the time. So I was 8 at the time. One of my uncles from a neighbouring village would often visit with his children, and when they did, my mum would let me go with them to a small hut-like shop that sold sweets and snacks like 15 minutes away from the family home. My cousins were 11 and 19, both male, and it was broad daylight when we would do this. But to get to the shop, we would walk through a small DIY road, and on both sides it was what I would call the jungle. It was basically just lots of trees and bushes as far as you could see. You can't really see anything beyond the trees. It's just a lot of greenery. Like I said too, I'm actually mixed with East Asian, and I definitely get my looks from my dad's side, so being an obvious foreigner in a rural part of Black Home meant that I was pretty used to strangers staring and asking me questions. I was also used to creepy men that would tell me that I was beautiful because I have pale skin. My mum definitely warned me about these men though, and always made sure that I knew to stay away from them. But anyway, the road to the hut was paved with these creepy people making creepy comments, and my cousins basically telling them to leave me alone, in less pleasant terms. There was also a group of young guys. Some of them had motorbikes and some were just chilling. One of them waved at me. He seemed friendly enough, and I'd met a lot of people, so I just waved back and went about my day. Once we got to the hut, we immediately started losing our self-control with the snacks. The owner was super friendly, and he let us try a bunch of sweets, and he also had some ice cream for the first time or something. I distinctly remember being really excited because my mum and one of the ladies that worked as a cook both loved this sort of ice cream, so I thought that it would be a nice surprise for them. I asked for 3, and the guy actually gave me 4, and so my hands were completely full, and they were quickly melting, and he told me to run, go home quickly. I told my cousins that I would get a running start, and once they finished, they could catch up with me. I would still be in their line of sight, plus it was daylight, and it was a busy road. So I start running back, and there were a few older aunties stood at the top of the road, and something about their presence just gave me a sense of security. I felt a lot safer knowing that they were there, and paired with the fact that my cousins were able to see me clearly, I felt comfortable enough to just walk back, leisurely, minding my business, eating my ice cream. I passed a group of guys, and the one that waved at me came over to me, and he said that I was so-and-so's niece, right? So-and-so being my uncle. And he jokingly took one of my ice creams and said she got an ice cream for Mama. Mama means uncle in our language. And so I just assumed that he was a friend of my uncle's. He then asked me when I arrived and how I was finding the country. He was actually really friendly, and he didn't look like the stereotypical creep that I was warned about. When I said that I was going to go home, he said, "Why don't you let Uncle take you? You can ride on my motorbike." I think that was when something clicked in my mind, that he maybe wasn't the friendly uncle that I thought he was. That's also when I realized I was pretty much circled in and was surrounded by a group now. It's also when I realized that I couldn't see my cousins anymore, or the group of old ladies, which also meant that they probably couldn't see me. I wish that I could explain in words just how helpless and afraid I was feeling. I had all the threats in the world explained to me by my mum in a country where I knew that I was vulnerable and had to be cautious, and still, I had somehow managed to find myself in this dangerous situation. Luckily, though, my cousins came running and shouting, probably because I was their responsibility, and the guys ran off into the jungle. This creeped me out, though, because there was just nothing in that jungle. Or so I thought. It was just trees as far as I could see, and I knew that it was going to be nearly impossible to find them in all of that. We caused quite the scene, though, and the villagers seemed to react as if they were already on edge. When I told my family what had happened, I was basically on house arrest, and my mum refused me out of her sight. I was pretty shook up by the whole situation, and so, honestly, I was kind of grateful for it. And I put it down to my paranoia, but at the time, I would just get this overwhelming feeling of being watched. Our village is quite small, like amongst them it's an everyone knows everyone sort of thing. My uncle is also a big community figure, and he's very well known amongst the villagers, which is why the men probably put 2 and 2 together, that I was his niece. Having foreign family over is usually a pretty big deal here, and having a niece that is mixed race was also a very big deal. I'm sure that word got around, in other words. But he soon realized that there was a group of men on motorbikes who would frequently go past our house. They stayed a distance away from our home, but they weren't anyone that we would have known. It's creepy to think about too now, that the lengths that they were going to. Anyway, a couple of days before we were due to fly back, I had my second, last, and worst encounter with this particular friendly uncle. So it was night, and it was like every other night where we would play board games or card games in the front room. Because it was so hot, I went to my bedroom and I was playing on my Nintendo DS. What a throwback, right? When I saw out of the corner of my eye someone at the window, staring directly at me. And it was him. The worst part, though, is that he had the most creepy and sick and twisted smile on him that I'd ever seen on a person. He put a finger to his lips, but I did the literal opposite and started screaming hysterically. I had been on edge since the ice cream incident, so what might seem like an overreaction was just my natural response at the time. I can't really tell what happened next because no one has ever told me, but my very large uncle and his also very large friends are not known to be the friendliest of people, but I was told that he was dealt with and that he would never bother me again. Now, we recently received a wedding film from one of my cousin's weddings, and a part of the film was her leaving to get to the venue, and I noticed that the jungle was no longer there. It had basically been cut down, and for the first time I could see beyond the greenery. That was when my mum explained to me that my uncle had it cut down not long after that particular visit because of the head cutters, and it sounds even more sinister in my own language. So my entire life, I've always been wondering what would have happened to me if I'd got on that motorbike, but now I know with reasonable certainty what his intentions were. Because during that time, a gang had actually kidnapped beggar children. It took a while for the village to realize because it's not unusual for beggar children to just go missing there. But when we were there, people were vaguely aware that it was becoming a trend. A couple of months later, a head was found, and it became known to our village, but people tried to keep it quiet to avoid getting a bad name. The problem went away once a lot of the greenery was cut down, so there was nowhere left to hide, but it's also when they realized the magnitude of what had actually happened. The weird thing is that I've known about the head cutters for a while. I knew that it was something that had occurred in our village, but for some reason, until recently, I just never really put two and two together. But now that I have, I often think about what, well, nearly happened to me. But more importantly, what happened to a handful of children in our little village. I often think about the fact that beyond our relatively small circle, well, no one really thinks about them. No one's haunted by their deaths. It's weird and sort of surreal when I think back about it all too, and realize just how close I was to being one of those children. So I went on a little hiking trip with my dad to Shasta, California, a small town in Northern California near the Oregon border. Shasta is home to a potentially active volcano named, well, of course, Mount Shasta. There are many trails on this mountain too, so my father and I were excited to do some hiking. We drove up the side of the mountain to the parking lot in which one of the trails begins. I believe it was called the Old Ski Bowl Trail or something. The landscape was a very barren incline, though, filled with rocks, boulders, dirt, and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, we came across a very odd assembly of these large boulders. They were sort of arranged in a circle, and we thought that it was weird, but we continued on. If you look up pictures of the trail, you'll see much smaller rocks arranged in patterns and circles too. And my father and I only encountered 3 people. Well, at least that's what they appeared to be at first. The first 2 were a father and son. We met them on a steep incline that went along the wall of the cliff that would then switch back as it reached to the top of the cliff. We stopped and we said hello, talked about the trail, and then went our separate ways. But here is where it gets weird. So Dad and I kept walking up the incline for just about 2 minutes. I turned around and I saw the father and the son so far down the trail that it just didn't make any sense. It should have taken them at least 20 minutes to get down there to where they were, but somehow they were there in only about 2 minutes. To this day, I have absolutely no idea how that could have happened. I mean, there was no one else on the trail at that point, and I could see the color of their clothes from that distance, so I knew that it was them. I pointed it out to my dad, and we both thought that it was weird, but we tried not to dwell on it, and we just kept going. And here is where it gets so much weirder. So as we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time, there were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued on the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach the top of another cliff. We reached a point where we would actually need climbing gear to continue, so at that point, we decided that we should just head back. But when we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks, just staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost as if he had none. Like, his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed him out to my dad, and then the man just quickly ducked down behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It almost seemed playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments, too, I was sort of out of it, and I actually have no recollection of what was going on. But according to my dad, I started walking towards this guy in the hat. My dad was calling to me, "Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And then I finally came to. I was apparently standing pretty much right at the edge of the cliff. It was a huge drop as well, enough to kill me or seriously injure me for sure. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail, and he told me to stay put, and my dad went down to the boulders to search for this guy, but when he did, he wasn't there. But again, the strange thing is that there was just nowhere for him to go except for up or down that trail. It really didn't make any sense, because he had just disappeared. I have no idea what's going on that trail, and I still have no explanation for that whole day. I've told this many times to family and friends, and nobody else has any explanation too. I've done research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. I've also read that the Native American tribes from the area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe that it could act as a portal to other dimensions or something, and that it's guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone who tried to go up to the volcano. I really don't know about any of that, but if anybody has any similar experiences or any insight at all, then I sure would love to hear it, because the whole thing is just really confusing. So please, do share anything that you have to offer, and thanks for listening.